2010s was a decade defined by upsets in all sports, and today we'll be taking a deep dive into the greatest NFL playoff upsets of the decade, as all of the games presented in the video had at least a 7-point favorite. In the 2010 wildcard round, the Seahawks would host the Saints in a seemingly lopsided matchup for New Orleans. The Saints were the defending Super Bowl champions, and although a wildcard were looking to make a deep playoff run again, with the same high-powered offense led by perennial All-Pro Drew Brees and the Bounty Gate coaching staff that propelled them to success the prior year. On the other hand, the 7-9 Seahawks were the first team in NFL history with a losing record to qualify for the playoffs, as they won the terrible NFC West division. Even though the Saints had to travel to the ruckus CenturyLink Stadium and experience the merciless 12th man, oddsmakers were sold that the defending champs would take care of business quite handily, as the Saints were 11-point favorites. The Saints jumped out to an unsurprising 17-7 first-half lead when the Seattle offense caught fire as Matt Hasselbeck threw 2 touchdown passes to give Seattle a 24-21 halftime lead. The Seahawks maintained this lead into the fourth quarter when Marshawn Lynch had the unforgettable Beastquake touchdown run to seal the game, as the Seahawks ended up winning 41-36. On the same day, the Jets would travel to Indianapolis to face the Colts in the wildcard round. The Jets were looking for redemption against the defending AFC champions, who had pulled off a fourth-quarter comeback to knock off New York in the 2009 AFC Championship. It would certainly not be easy for the upset-minded Jets, as they had to stop 4-time MVP Peyton Manning in his home stadium. The Colts were favored by 7.5 points and would go into halftime with a 7-0 lead and an underwhelming first half of play. In the second half, LaDainian Tomlinson would rush for 2 one-yard touchdowns, and Mark Sanchez would lead a clutch late fourth-quarter drive, capped off by a 32-yard Nick Folk field goal to give the Jets the victory, 17-16. The very next week, in the divisional round, the Jets faced off against the 14-2 Patriots, who would embarrass them 45-3 in their latest meeting. In 2010, Tom Brady led the top offense in the NFL, and oddsmakers believed New England would again have their way with the Jets, as the Pats were 9-point favorites at home. However, a determined Mark Sanchez would throw 3 touchdown passes, and a redemption-minded Jets defense was able to stifle the Pats' high-powered offense, which ultimately culminated into a 28-21 victory for the Jets. In the 2011 wildcard round, the Broncos would play the Steelers in the Mile High City. The Broncos had a tumultuous 8-8 season with Tim Tebow at the helm. Denver had lost their last 3 going into the playoffs, but were able to capitalize on a weak AFC West to advance to the playoffs. The Steelers were a great wildcard at 12-4 and hence were a 7.5-point favorite on the road. The Steelers led 6-0 after the first quarter, but had a second-quarter debacle letting the streaky Broncos have 20 unanswered points. The Steelers managed to tie the game at 23 apiece in the waning moments of regulation and set up overtime. In the first play of overtime, Tebow delivered a clutch throw to Demaryius Thomas, who ran in an 80-yard score to win the game. In the 2011 divisional round, the Giants would travel to Lambeau Field to take on the Packers. Green Bay had a superb 2011 campaign, going 15-1 in hopes of repeating as Super Bowl champions. Aaron Rodgers had his best statistical season, throwing 45 touchdowns and over 4,500 yards, which earned him MVP honors. The Packers were 8-point favorites against the 9-7 wildcard Giants, who were looking for another improbable Super Bowl run with Eli Manning. The underdog Giants had carved up the Packers in the first half, claiming a 20-10 halftime lead. The relentless pass rush for New York ultimately played a crucial role in the second half, ending multiple drives for the Packers by sacking Rodgers. The Giants would pull off the upset, winning 37-20. In the 2012 divisional round, the Ravens would travel to Denver to take on the Broncos in Peyton Manning's first playoff game with the Broncos. In Peyton Manning's first year in Denver, he led the Broncos to a 13-3 record and an 11-game winning streak heading into the playoffs. The Broncos were a clear favorite to win the AFC, and in the divisional round they faced the inconsistent Ravens. Surprisingly, the Ravens were able to keep up with the prolific Denver offense, trading scores all game, but still needed to go the length of the field in less than a minute to force overtime. Joe Flacco then threw a 70-yard touchdown pass to Jacoby Jones in the famous Mile High Miracle to tie the game 35-35. In double overtime, Justin Tucker kicked a 47-yard field goal to secure the upset win for the Ravens. The next week, the Ravens played the Patriots in the AFC Championship game for the second year in a row after losing to them in heartbreaking fashion the year prior. The Patriots seemed destined to repeat as AFC champions, having a much more consistent season at 12-4, and as a result were 7.5-point favorites. After trailing 13-7 at halftime, the Ravens scored 3 unanswered touchdowns to win the game, as Flacco had another brilliant performance. The Ravens would win 28-13 to advance to the Super Bowl. In the 2013 wildcard round, the Bengals would host the Chargers. 2013 seemed like a very opportune time for the Bengals to win their first playoff game of the 21st century, as they were 0-5 in the playoffs in the 2000s. The Bengals went 8-0 at home, behind an excellent pass rush and a great season for Andy Dalton. The Chargers, who had just barely advanced to the playoffs in a Week 17 overtime thriller against the Chiefs, were 7-point underdogs. The favored Bengals took a 10-7 first-half lead with a strong defensive performance. However, Phillip Rivers and the Chargers offense found their stride in the second half, rattling off 20 unanswered points to win 27-10. In the 2014 divisional round, the Broncos would face the Colts. The Broncos were looking to repeat as AFC champions after another successful 12-4 regular season for Manning and the high-flying Denver offense. The Colts had just completed an insane 28-point comeback against the Chiefs the previous week, but their defense did not look ready for Manning and the Broncos after giving up 44 points to Alex Smith and the Chiefs. The Broncos were 9.5-point favorites for the divisional round matchup, as they were a perfect 8-0 at home in 2014. In shocking fashion, though, the Colts defense was able to suffocate the Broncos offense, holding them to under 300 yards and just 1 touchdown, winning the game 24-13. The Chiefs and Titans would clash at Arrowhead Stadium in the 2017 AFC wildcard round, in a critical game for Alex Smith and Andy Reid, whose careers had been overshadowed by bad playoff performances. The 2017 Chiefs had a streaky 10-6 campaign, but had great offensive performances late in the season, which resulted in a 4-game winning streak heading into the playoffs. The 9-7 Titans looked to be on the opposite trajectory, losing 3 of their last 4, with no real identity, and had head coach Mike Mularkey on the hot seat. The Chiefs' offense was on fire in the first half and propelled Kansas City to a 21-3 lead at halftime. The reeling Titans would get a lucky break as Marcus Mariota would complete a tipped pass to himself and run it in for a touchdown. The Titans would score 2 more touchdowns and would hold the electric Chiefs offense to 0 second-half points to win 22-21. In the 2017 AFC divisional round, the talented offense of the Steelers, led by Ben Roethlisberger, faced off against the Jaguars, who had been the best defense in the NFL that year, dubbed Sacksonville. Although having inconsistent quarterback play with Blake Bortles, the Jaguars had already stunned Pittsburgh in Heinz Field in Week 5, winning 30-9. Oddsmakers were still very confident in the 13-3 Steelers, who many thought would go to the Super Bowl. The Jaguars started the game out with 3 rushing touchdowns and took the lead 21-0. Later in the second quarter, Telvin Smith returned a 50-yard strip sack to the end zone to give Jacksonville a threatening 28-7 lead. In the second half, the Steelers' offense caught fire, scoring 21 in the fourth quarter, but it was ultimately too late for the favorite Steelers, who would lose 45-42. The Saints hosted the Vikings in the 2019 wildcard round, which was expected to be a great chance for the Saints to avenge their playoff loss to the Vikings 2 years prior in the Minneapolis Miracle. The Saints were coming off an impressive 13-3 season and were one of the top contenders in the NFC, while the Vikings were the 6th seed and had Kirk Cousins quarterbacking, who was well known for choking in primetime games. The Saints were 7.5-point favorites in the Superdome and jumped out to a 10-3 lead when Dalvin Cook and the Vikings offense caught fire, scoring 17 unanswered points going into the fourth quarter. Drew Brees and the powerful Saints offense were able to tie the game 20-20 to head into overtime. In shocking fashion, Kirk Cousins brushed off the choking narrative, leading a full-field drive capped off with a game-winning touchdown pass to Kyle Rudolph, as the Vikings would win 26-20. The Titans traveled to Baltimore to take on the Ravens in the 2019 divisional round. The Ravens were the most dominant team of the 2019 season, winning their last 12 games to secure the 1 seed in the AFC behind a dominant run-centered attack with Lamar Jackson and Mark Ingram. The Titans had barely claimed the 6th seed in the AFC, but had managed to upset the Patriots in Foxborough the week before with a tough defense and great game from Derrick Henry. The Ravens were at home and appeared to be a team without holes, and therefore were 9.5-point favorites. The Titans got out to a strong 14-0 start in the first quarter and would lead 14-6 when Henry threw a jump pass to Corey Davis to give Tennessee a 15-point advantage. The Titans would later tack on another touchdown to stretch the lead to 28-6 and would stop Lamar Jackson in enough critical situations to ultimately win 28-12. Despite outgaining the Titans by 230 yards, the Ravens would lose the turnover battle 3-0 and would also fail to convert on 4th down on 4 different occasions, even though they had a 71% 4th down conversion rate going into the game.